Imagine a sound like distant rain, a soft, persistent hissing that never stops, day or night. It's the sound of liquid nitrogen boiling at -196 degrees Celsius, cold enough to freeze air itself into a blue liquid, cold enough to stop all biological processes, cold enough perhaps to pause death itself. In a nondescript building in Scottsdale, Arizona, where the desert sun bakes the pavement and saguaro cacti dot the landscape, this sound fills a room where nearly 200 people wait. They're not alive in any conventional sense. Their hearts don't beat. Their brains show no activity. They meet every legal definition of death, but they're not gone either. They're preserved in stainless steel tanks, their bodies or heads maintained at temperatures where chemistry essentially stops, where cellular decay can't progress, where time in a biological sense has paused. They're waiting for a future that may never come, betting on technologies that don't yet exist, suspended between endings and impossible new beginnings, and caring for them, maintaining their preservation, monitoring their long sleep, are cryonics technicians, people who work at the strangest intersection of mortuary science, emergency medicine, careful chemistry, and stubborn hope. Welcome to Yawnworthy Jobs for Sleep, where we explore the remarkable work that shapes our world. Tonight, we're entering a cryonics facility in 2025, following a technician through a day that includes both the routine care of existing patients and the preparation and preservation of a new arrival. So settle in, let your breathing slow, perhaps adjust your blanket and pillow, and join us in exploring a profession that exists at the very edge of what we consider possible, a job performed with scientific precision in service of uncertain miracles. The alarm sounds at 5:45 in the morning, pulling the cryonics technician from sleep in her apartment in Tempe, about 20 minutes from the facility. She's 34 years old, with a background in biomedical engineering and emergency medical services, a combination that makes her unusually qualified for work that exists nowhere in official job classification systems. When people ask what she does for a living, she usually says medical preservation or research technician, vague enough to avoid the follow-up questions that inevitably come when you mention cryonics. The skepticism, the jokes about Han Solo frozen in carbonite, the assumption that it's science fiction rather than science fact, all exhausting to address at dinner parties or casual conversations. The morning routine is ordinary: shower, coffee, toast with peanut butter. She checks her phone for any overnight alerts from the facility. The monitoring systems send automatic notifications if anything falls outside normal parameters. If a dewar's nitrogen level drops too quickly, if a temperature sensor shows unexpected readings, if the backup power system activates due to utility failure. This morning, no alerts. The patients are stable, maintained in their indefinite pause. Their biological clocks stopped at the moment of legal death years or decades ago. The drive to Scottsdale takes her through the sprawling Phoenix metropolitan area as it wakes. Up, traffic building on the 101 freeway, the winter sun just beginning to light the eastern sky with bands of orange and pink that stretch across the horizon. Arizona's winter mornings are crisp but pleasant, temperatures in the 50s that will climb to the 70s by afternoon, perfect weather that attracts retirees and snowbirds escaping harsher climates. The weather matters less to her work than almost any other profession inside the facility. Temperature control is absolute, the patient care bay maintained at a steady 18 degrees Celsius to minimize nitrogen boil-off rates, while the patients themselves exist in an environment so cold it exists nowhere naturally on Earth. The facility itself is deliberately unremarkable, a single-story industrial building that could house a small manufacturing company or medical supply distributor. There's no sign announcing its purpose, just an address number and a small placard reading Advanced Neural Biosciences, one of the euphemisms cryonics organizations use to avoid attention. The parking lot holds maybe a dozen spaces, most empty at this early hour. The building's architecture reveals nothing of what happens inside. The rows of stainless steel dewars, each one a 10-foot tall cylinder containing up to 4 patients. Each patient maintained at temperatures that would shatter steel that wasn't specifically engineered for cryogenic applications. She parks and approaches the entrance, keys in hand. The facility uses multiple security layers, partly because of the valuable equipment inside, but mostly because the patients deserve protection. These aren't just bodies, not in the philosophical framework of cryonics. They're people in a state of biostasis. Their information, the patterns of neurons and synapses that constituted their minds, their memories, their personalities potentially preserved in the structure of vitrified tissue. Protecting them is protecting people, even if those people show no vital signs and won't for decades or centuries. The first sound upon entering is that soft hissing, the constant background of liquid nitrogen boiling. It's not loud, more of an atmospheric presence, like distant rainfall or wind in trees. But it's constant, never ceasing, and after months of working here, the technician has learned to hear variations in it, the pitch change when a dewar is freshly filled, the slightly different timbre from the larger dewars that hold 4 patients versus the smaller units holding 1. It's become a comfort, this sound, proof that the systems are working, that preservation continues uninterrupted. Sometimes, in moments of quiet contemplation, she thinks of it as a heartbeat, not the rapid pulse of a living heart, but the slow, patient rhythm of an institution committed to the very long term. She passes through the administrative area, a small office with desks, computers, filing cabinets containing decades of paperwork, and enters the patient care bay. This room is the facility's heart, a space about the size of a large warehouse, filled with rows of stainless steel dewars. They're arranged in neat lines with walking paths between them, each one labeled with alphanumeric codes rather than names. Patient confidentiality extends beyond death. Even staff don't necessarily know who's in each dewar unless they check the secure database. The morning's first task is rounds, a systematic check of every dewar in the facility. The technician, Sarah, though she rarely uses her name with patients' families, preferring the professional distance of the technician or facility staff, begins at the north end with dewar A1, one of the oldest units, installed in the late 1990s. She checks the nitrogen level gauge, a simple mechanical indicator showing the liquid level inside. Full would be 100%. Anything below 75% requires refilling. This dewar reads 82%, normal for a unit that was topped off 4 days ago. Next, she checks the temperature sensors. Each dewar has multiple thermocouples monitoring temperature at different heights, ensuring uniform cooling throughout. The digital display shows minus 195.8 degrees Celsius at the top sensor, minus 196.1 at the middle, minus 196.2 at the bottom. Perfect. At these temperatures, thermal stratification is minimal. The liquid nitrogen provides remarkably uniform cooling. The physics are fascinating. Liquid nitrogen boils at minus 196 degrees Celsius at standard atmospheric pressure, and maintaining that temperature requires only keeping the liquid level adequate. The patients are suspended in this boiling liquid, constantly surrounded by the phase change that carries away any heat that might leak into the system. The dewar's exterior is covered with frost, normal for a vessel containing liquid nitrogen. The technician brushes away some accumulated ice crystals and inspects the vacuum jacket, seal the space between the inner and outer walls that provides insulation. Any compromise of this vacuum would dramatically increase nitrogen boil-off rates and threaten patient stability. The seal looks intact, no signs of moisture or unusual frost patterns that would indicate problems. The vacuum jacket is critical technology. Without it, the liquid nitrogen would boil away in hours instead of weeks, making long-term storage impractical. She moves to the next dewar, then the next, establishing a rhythm. Check nitrogen level, check temperatures, inspect exterior, verify pressure relief valve operation, look for any anomalies. Some dewars hold whole-body patients, people who chose to have their entire bodies preserved. A more expensive option that requires larger storage units and more liquid nitrogen for cooling. The whole body option typically costs around $200,000, including lifetime maintenance, paid either upfront or through life insurance policies. Others hold neuropatients, people who opted for just head preservation, a choice based on the belief that identity and memory reside entirely in the brain, making the body unnecessary for future revival. Neuropreservation costs roughly half as much, around $80,000 to $100,000. The technician doesn't judge these choices. Everyone preserved here made their decisions based on personal philosophy, financial constraints, and their own relationship with mortality. Some whole-body patients wanted the psychological comfort of being whole in preservation. Some believed that body preservation might provide useful information to future revival teams, DNA, cellular structures, evidence of medical conditions. Neuropatients often took a more pragmatic view. If revival technology is advanced enough to repair cryopreservation damage, it's certainly advanced enough to clone or construct a new body from genetic information. Dewar C7 catches her attention. The nitrogen level reads 73%, lower than expected for a unit filled 6 days ago. She makes a note on her tablet to refill it this morning, rather than waiting for the usual weekly schedule. A slightly elevated boil-off rate could indicate a degrading vacuum seal, something that requires monitoring. If it continues, the patients might need transfer to a different dewar, a complex procedure requiring careful planning and temporary storage in a backup unit, while C7 is removed for 5. Service. Patient transfer is rare but necessary, part of the long-term maintenance that makes indefinite preservation possible. The facility keeps several backup dewars for this purpose, empty units ready to receive patients if primary storage develops problems. The transfer process itself is dramatic. Patients are lifted from one dewar in a cloud of nitrogen vapor, quickly moved through the air where they begin warming slightly, and lowered into the backup dewar where they cool again. The entire transfer takes less than 2 minutes, limiting warming to perhaps 5 or 10 degrees, from -196 to -185 before cooling resumes. It's a calculated risk, accepted as necessary for long-term care. By 7:30, she's completed the dewar inspection and moves to the computer workstation to review overnight data. The facility's monitoring system logs thousands of data points continuously, temperature readings from every sensor, nitrogen levels calculated from weight sensors beneath each dewar, room temperature and humidity, backup power system status, network connectivity for the remote monitoring service. The technician reviews graphs showing the past 24 hours, looking for any unusual trends or anomalies. Everything looks stable. The temperature traces are flat lines at -196 degrees, exactly as they should be. The nitrogen level curves show the expected gradual decline as liquid boils off normal thermodynamic behavior at these temperatures. The room environmental controls maintained 18 degrees Celsius despite outside temperatures dropping to 8 degrees overnight. The HVAC system working efficiently to balance the cold radiating from the dewars against the need for a comfortable working environment. She pulls up the patient database, a secure system containing detailed records for everyone in storage. The database includes their membership contracts, medical histories, preservation procedures, storage locations, and contact information for family members or designated representatives. Some patients have been here since the 1980s, 4 decades in biostasis, their preservation spanning technological eras from the Cold War through the smartphone age to whatever comes next. The longest-term patient is in dewar, a 3, a mathematician who died in 1984 and has now been in cryopreservation for over 40 years, longer than he lived. Did he imagine, signing his contracts in the 1970s, that he'd wait this long? Does waiting even have meaning in a state of suspended animation where consciousness is absent? The database shows the diversity of people who chose cryonics. Scientists and engineers make up a large percentage, their professional familiarity with technology making the concept more accessible. But there are also artists, teachers, business owners, retired military officers, homemakers, People from all walks of life united by a refusal to accept death as final. Some were elderly, reaching end of life naturally and choosing preservation as a last-ditch hope. Others were relatively young, struck down by disease or accident, their preservation representing futures stolen and possibly restored. Sarah clicks through a few profiles, reading the brief biographies that families provided. A software developer who worked on early internet infrastructure in the 1990s, preserved in 2003 after a sudden heart attack. A marine biologist who studied coral reefs, preserved in 2015 after cancer, leaving a note expressing hope that she might see healthy oceans again if revival became possible. A jazz musician preserved just last year. His profile, including links to recordings of his performances, music that continues to exist in the world even though its creator waits in liquid nitrogen. These stories ground the work for Sarah, reminding her that the dewars don't contain abstract patients but actual people with histories and relationships and unrealized dreams. It's easy to become clinical, to see the work as purely technical, maintain temperatures, monitor systems, execute procedures, but the human element matters. These people trusted the organization with their most fundamental hope, the possibility of continued existence. That trust demands respect and diligent care. The technician's phone vibrates at 9:47, pulling her from philosophical contemplation. It's the emergency number, the line that only rings for one reason. A member has been declared legally dead, and standby procedures are initiating. She answers immediately. "This is the facility. We have a code yellow," the voice says, the standby team coordinator, calling from a hospital in Phoenix. Member 0437, Robert Castellano, age 78, pronounced at 9:32 this morning. Family is cooperative, hospital staff aware of arrangements. We're requesting technician response for transport and perfusion. Code yellow means standby was in place. The team was already at the hospital, equipment positioned, ready to begin stabilization immediately after legal death. This is the ideal scenario, maximizing the chances of good preservation by minimizing the time when the body is dead but not yet preserved. Every minute between legal death and the beginning of cryoprotective perfusion is a minute when cells are degrading, when the delicate structures of neurons and synapses are breaking down, when information is being lost. Speed matters enormously. "I'm leaving now," the technician confirms. ETA 25 minutes. She grabs the emergency response kit, a backpack containing supplies that might be needed during transport, and heads for the facility's ambulance, a specially modified vehicle that serves as a mobile perfusion unit. The ambulance looks ordinary from outside, white with medical markings, but the interior is filled with specialized equipment, a thumper device for mechanical chest compressions, IV poles, medication supplies, and most importantly, a portable perfusion circuit that can begin circulating cryoprotectant solutions during transport. The drive to the hospital takes 22 minutes through mid-morning Phoenix traffic, the ambulance's lights and siren clearing a path. The technician mentally reviews the procedures during the drive, running through the checklist that's been drilled into her through training and practice. Confirm legal death declaration, verify patient identity, coordinate with hospital staff, begin or continue stabilization, manage family interactions with empathy and professionalism, transport to facility, begin perfusion procedure. Every step matters. Every decision affects the quality of preservation and ultimately the theoretical possibility of future revival. The hospital is Banner University Medical Center, a large facility on the east side of Phoenix. The technician parks the ambulance at the emergency entrance and enters through doors that have opened for her dozens of times on similar calls. She's not quite medical staff, but not quite funeral home either. Cryonics occupies a unique space in the healthcare system, permitted by law but not quite integrated into standard end-of-life procedures. Hospital staff reactions vary. Some are curious and supportive, understanding that people have the right to choose how their remains are handled. Others are skeptical or uncomfortable, viewing cryonics as pseudoscience or denial of death's reality. The technician has learned to navigate these attitudes with professional neutrality, focusing on the task rather than debating philosophy. The standby team coordinator meets her at the entrance, a physician who specializes in emergency cryonic stabilization, one of perhaps a dozen doctors in the world with this unusual expertise. He's in his 50s, a former emergency room physician who became involved with cryonics after treating a patient who was a member. He's in room 412, the coordinator says as they walk quickly through corridors. Cancer patient, hospice care, expected death. Family called us when he went into active dying yesterday afternoon, so we had about 16 hours of standby. Pronounced at 9:32, we initiated cooling and medications at 9:35. 3-minute gap, excellent timing. 3 minutes between legal death and the beginning of stabilization. In cryonics, this is remarkably good. Some patients experience hours or even days of delay when death is unexpected or occurs in jurisdictions unfriendly to cryonics. Those cases result in much poorer preservation quality, though the organization preserves them anyway. Even damaged preservation might be reversible with sufficiently advanced technology. The organization has a policy of attempting preservation for any member, regardless of circumstances, based on the principle that partial information is better than no information. They enter room 412, which has been transformed into something between a hospital room and an emergency resuscitation area. Robert Castellano lies on the bed, legally dead, but surrounded by equipment maintaining a semblance of biological function. The thumper device compresses his chest rhythmically at 100 compressions per minute, maintaining artificial circulation that pushes blood through his vessels even though his heart has stopped. IV lines run into both arms, delivering medications: heparin to prevent blood clotting, antioxidants to minimize cellular damage from oxygen deprivation, a buffering solution to control pH and prevent acidosis. His body is surrounded by bags of ice, crushed ice in heavy-duty plastic bags arranged around his head, torso, and limbs, cooling him towards 0 degrees Celsius, slowing the chemical reactions that constitute cellular decay. The standby team, 4 people total, including the coordinator, has been working continuously since the death pronouncement 35 minutes ago. They look tired but focused, performing tasks with the practiced efficiency of emergency medical teams, though their patient is someone who won't benefit in any conventional sense. The benefit, if it exists, lies decades or centuries in the future, in a time when their patient might be revived and restored to health by technologies that currently exist only in theory and speculation. Vitals, the coordinator says, though vitals is a strange term for someone legally dead. We're maintaining artificial circulation at about 30% of normal cardiac output, enough to move fluids, but not enough to simulate life. Core temperature is down to 22 degrees Celsius and dropping about 2 degrees per hour. No signs of clotting in the IV lines. Blood gases are acceptable, given the circumstances: elevated carbon dioxide, low oxygen, but within ranges we can work with. I'd say we're looking at good preservation potential. The technician approaches the bed, looking at Robert Castellano's face. He's an elderly man, his features relaxed in death, the terminal illness visible in his thinness and the yellowish tinge to his skin suggesting liver involvement. But there's also something peaceful about his expression, as if death brought relief from the cancer that had been killing him for months. She wonders, as she always does, what he was like in life. The database will have his membership file, probably an interview where he explained why he chose cryonics, what he hoped for, what future he imagined. Those files are fascinating reading during quiet shifts, windows into the minds of people who look at death and say, maybe not permanently. A woman in her 50s sits in the corner of the room, red-eyed but composed Robert's daughter. The technician guesses correctly. The coordinator confirms this with a gesture, and the technician approaches her carefully, pulling up a chair to sit at eye level rather than looming over someone who's grieving. "I'm Sarah," the technician says, using her first name in this context where personal connection matters more than professional distance. "I'm from the cryonics facility, I'm very sorry for your loss. Thank you, the daughter says. Her voice is steady despite the tears on her cheeks, the kind of composure that comes from having time to prepare for an expected death. He wanted this. He talked about it for years, ever since my mother died. He said he wasn't ready to be gone permanently. He had too many questions still unanswered, too many things he wanted to see. This is always the delicate conversation, the balance between acknowledging death and acknowledging hope. We're going to take excellent care of him, Sarah says. The stabilization your father's receiving right now is giving him the best possible preservation. Once we transport him to our facility, we'll begin the perfusion procedure, replacing his blood with cryoprotectant chemicals that will prevent ice damage during cooling. The entire process takes several hours, and it's performed with the same precision as any surgical procedure. Will it work? The daughter asks. Will they be able to bring him back someday? It's the question everyone asks, and honesty requires acknowledging uncertainty. I don't know, Sarah admits. Nobody knows. The science behind cryonics is sound. We can preserve tissue structure at the cellular level, including the fine structures of neurons where memories and personality are encoded. But revival would require technologies we don't have. Yet, nanotechnology, or advanced molecular repair systems that can reverse freezing damage and cure whatever caused death in the process. First place, it might be possible, it might not. But what I can promise is that we'll maintain your father's preservation indefinitely, for decades or centuries if necessary, giving that possibility the best chance. The daughter nods slowly, processing this carefully hedged hope. He believed it was possible. He was a research scientist, chemistry, and he said the physics worked. That preservation was just really good information storage. He used to say, dying was like having your hard drive corrupted. But if you had a backup, maybe you could restore the files. That's a good metaphor, Sarah says, finding it genuinely apt. And if that's possible, the quality of the backup matters enormously. That's why we're moving so quickly, why all this equipment is here. We're trying to make the backup as complete as possible, preserving as much information as we can about who your father was, not just his genetic information, but the specific patterns in his brain that made him himself. They talk for a few more minutes, Sarah explaining the next steps, answering questions about storage and costs, and the long-term care the facility provides. The daughter will inherit her father's storage responsibilities. Someone needs to pay the annual maintenance fees, ensure the organization remains financially viable, serve as the designated representative if future revival teams have questions about his medical history or preferences. It's not just a one-time purchase. It's an ongoing commitment that could span generations. Some patients have trust funds established specifically for this purpose, financial structures designed to survive for centuries, earning enough investment returns to cover the few $100s per year that liquid nitrogen refills cost. By 10:45, the stabilization team has done everything possible at the hospital. Robert's core temperature is down to 15 degrees Celsius. His circulation maintained artificially by the thumper's tireless compressions, medications circulating through his artificially perfused tissues. It's time for transport. The team carefully transfers him to the ambulance gurney, keeping all the equipment connected and functioning. The thumper continues its rhythmic compression, maintaining the simulation of circulation. The ice bags remain in place, preventing rewarming. IV pumps maintain medication flow at calculated rates. They're creating a mobile intensive care unit for someone who's legally dead, but biologically preserved in a state of controlled deterioration. The daughter follows them to the ambulance, watches as they load her father inside with the care typically reserved for living patients. The equipment fills the ambulance's patient compartment, monitors beeping softly, pumps humming, the mechanical regularity of the thumper providing an artificial heartbeat. "Can I come with you?" she asks. "You can follow us to the facility," Sarah says gently. "You're welcome to be there, to see the procedure room if you'd like." Some families find it comforting to witness the process, to understand what's happening. Others prefer to say goodbye here and let us handle the technical aspects. There's no wrong choice. I'll follow, the daughter decides. I want to see where he'll be. I want to understand what his next 40 years or 200 years will look like. The ambulance ride back to Scottsdale takes 30 minutes, driving with lights but not sirens. There's urgency, but it's a different kind than emergency medical transport. They're not rushing to save a life in the conventional sense. They're racing against thermodynamics, against the slow collapse of cellular structure that continues even at low temperatures until cryoprotectants are in place and deep cooling begins. It's a race against entropy itself, against the universal tendency of organized systems to break down into disorder. Inside the ambulance, Sarah monitors the equipment, while a standby team member maintains the thumper and checks IV lines. The portable perfusion circuit sits ready but not yet operating. That will begin at the facility where they have better equipment and more controlled conditions. For now, the focus is cooling and medication delivery, buying time until proper preservation can begin. The ice bags are already melting, water pooling in the plastic around Robert's cooling body, heat slowly transferring from flesh to ice, from warm to cold, the relentless physics of thermal equilibrium. How did you get into this work? The team member asks during the drive. He's newer to cryonics, still in the phase where the strangeness hasn't worn into routine, where every procedure provokes existential questions about life and death and the boundaries between them. I was an EMT, Sarah says, adjusting an IV line that's developed a slight kink, and I got frustrated saving people just so they could die eventually anyway. I know that sounds dark, but I started thinking about mortality differently. Why accept it if we might not have to? Why treat death as inevitable when it might just be a technical problem we haven't solved yet? I took a biomedical engineering degree, learned about tissue preservation and cryobiology, and found out cryonics organizations were hiring. It felt like the same work emergency response, preservation of life, but with a longer time horizon. Instead of saving someone for another few years or decades, maybe saving them indefinitely. Do you think it'll work? Revival, I mean? Sarah shrugs, a gesture the team member probably doesn't see in the ambulance's dim interior. I think it might. The physics and chemistry are sound. The challenge is engineering building machines that can work at the cellular level to repair damage, molecule by molecule if necessary. But look at what we've accomplished in the last 50 years. Heart transplants, in vitro fertilization, gene therapy, mRNA vaccines designed in days. Extrapolate that progress forward 100 years, 200 years. It starts to seem possible, maybe even probable. But even if it's possible, it might not happen. The organization might not survive that long, or society might decide not to revive people, or future generations might just forget about these frozen patients and let the dewars warm up. Or 100 other things could go wrong. Sarah agrees. That's why it's a gamble. But what's the alternative? Traditional burial or cremation are certainties you're definitely not coming back from those. Cryonics is a long shot, but it's a shot. For people like Robert, that's enough. A small probability of an enormous benefit continued life, seeing the future, potentially infinite lifespan if aging is solved versus the certainty of permanent ending. The expected value calculation favors trying. The ambulance arrives at the facility at 11:30. The daughter pulls into the parking lot behind them, gets out of her car hesitantly, looking at the nondescript building that will be her father's home for an indefinite future. Sarah greets her while the team begins unloading the gurney, carefully navigating the ambulance's rear doors with equipment still running and connected. Would you like to see the patient care bay? Sarah offers. The room where your father will be stored. The daughter nods, and Sarah leads her inside, through the administrative area to the patient care bay. The daughter stops at the threshold, taking in the rows of stainless steel dewars, the soft hissing of liquid nitrogen that fills the space like ambient music, the frost coating the vessel's exteriors in beautiful crystalline patterns. He'll be in one of these? Yes. Each dewar can hold up to 4 patients. Your father will share space with others, all of them waiting together. The temperature is -196 degrees Celsius, cold enough that all biological processes stop completely. Chemical reactions require thermal energy molecules need to move and collide to react. At that temperature, there's essentially no thermal energy. Molecules are nearly motionless. He'll be in a state of perfect preservation until revival technologies are developed. How long have people been waiting? Our longest-term patient has been here since 1984, 41 years in biostasis. Others are more recent. We had someone preserved last month. The wait times vary enormously, but we're committed to maintaining preservation indefinitely. Some of our patients have trust funds set up to pay maintenance fees for centuries. The organization itself has contingency plans to ensure continuity, even if current staff are gone. Property rights, legal protections, successor organizations identified. The daughter reaches out toward the nearest dewar, but stops short of touching it, perhaps afraid of the cold, perhaps simply hesitant to make physical contact with something so alien. It's beautiful, in a strange way. All these people, waiting for tomorrow. That's exactly what it is, Sarah says softly. The longest waiting room in history. Some people find it melancholy, all this waiting with no guarantee of an ending, but I find it hopeful. Every person here looked at death and said, "Not yet, not if I can help it." That takes courage. They return to the procedure area where the team is preparing for perfusion. The daughter decides to stay, to witness the process, and Sarah respects that choice. Some families need to see, to understand, to be present for this transition from death to preservation. They seat her in a chair behind a glass partition where she can observe without interfering, where she can be close to her father during these final hours before he enters his long, cold sleep. Robert Castellano is transferred to the procedure table, and the real work of preservation begins. The perfusion room looks like a surgical theater, because in many ways, that's exactly what it is. Stainless steel equipment surrounds a central table where Robert lies, still cooled by ice, still receiving artificial circulation from the thumper device that's been compressing his chest for over 3 hours now. But the atmosphere is different from a hospital operating room. There's no urgency in the movements, no shouted orders or crisis energy. Instead, there's a calm, methodical focus, a team working through procedures that have been refined over decades of practice and hundreds of cases. Sarah scrubs in, along with 3 other team members, the physician coordinator who managed stabilization, a perfusionist with experience in cardiac surgery who adapted those skills to cryonics, and another technician who will monitor equipment and record data. They wear surgical gowns and gloves not to protect the patient from infection. Infection is impossible in someone who's dead, and will soon be at -196 degrees, but to protect themselves from the chemicals they'll be using and to maintain the procedural discipline that ensures quality work. The physician performs a final check of Robert's condition, reviewing monitors and examining the body with practiced attention. Core temperature now at 8 degrees Celsius, steadily approaching the freezing point of water. Artificial circulation maintained without interruption since death pronouncement. No signs of clotting in the IV lines or visible coagulation issues. The ice bath cooling has been successful. He's as ready as he'll ever be, the physician says. Let's give him the best preservation we can. The perfusion procedure's goal is to replace Robert's blood and body fluids with cryoprotectant chemicals, substances that prevent ice crystal formation during cooling. This is the critical distinction between cryonics and simple freezing, the difference between preservation and destruction. When water freezes, it forms ice crystals that expand and grow, physically disrupting cellular structure like tiny knives slicing through membranes and organelles. Freezing damage is catastrophic to cells, which is why frozen tissues like frostbitten fingers often die. Cryoprotectants prevent ice formation by disrupting the molecular organization that allows crystals to form, allowing tissues to vitrify, transform into a glass-like solid state without crystallization. It's the same principle used in frozen embryo storage. Proven technology that's allowed thousands of successful pregnancies from embryos stored for years in liquid nitrogen. The perfusionist connects Robert's circulatory system to the perfusion circuit, a complex arrangement of pumps, heat exchangers, monitoring equipment, and reservoir bags. Cannula's large bore tubes are inserted into major blood vessels, the femoral artery and the groin for inflow, providing a route to push cryoprotectant solution into the arterial system and the femoral vein for outflow, allowing displaced blood and fluids to drain. The cannulation is performed with surgical precision, the physician making careful incisions and inserting the tubes with practiced movements. The circuit is primed with an initial solution, a carrier fluid that will prepare tissues for cryoprotectant acceptance, and pumps begin moving fluid through Robert's vascular system. The thumper is turned off, no longer needed once the perfusion pumps take over the job of circulation. For the first time in hours, Robert's chest is still, but fluid is still flowing through his vessels, pushed by external pumps rather than a heart. The first stage uses a carrier solution that's essentially a buffered salt solution, similar to the fluids used in organ preservation for transplantation. It's pumped through at just above 0 degrees Celsius, continuing the cooling process while beginning to displace blood. The outflow from the venous cannula drains into a reservoir bag, and Sarah monitors it carefully, watching as the dark red of blood gradually lightens as it's diluted by the clear carrier solution. The color change is one of many indicators that perfusion is working, that the solution is reaching tissues throughout the body. Flows look good, the perfusionist reports, watching pressure gauges and flow meters. We're getting about 2 liters per minute circulation, decent distribution. Pressures are normal for a perfusion case, about 60 millimeters of mercury arterial pressure, which is about half normal blood pressure, but adequate for our purposes. The monitoring equipment displays dozens of parameters, inflow and outflow pressures that indicate resistance in the vascular system, flow rates that show how much fluid is moving per minute, fluid temperatures measured at multiple points, reservoir levels that track how much solution has been used. The team watches these numbers constantly, adjusting pump speeds and pressures to ensure uniform perfusion throughout Robert's body. Poor distribution would leave some tissues inadequately protected, creating ice damage during final cooling, a problem that could potentially destroy the very information they're trying to preserve. After 30 minutes of carrier solution perfusion, watching the outflow clear from dark red to pink to nearly colorless, they switch to the cryoprotectant mixture, a carefully formulated blend of chemicals including glycerol, ethylene, glycol, and dimethyl sulfoxide. These are the same types of compounds used in antifreeze for cars, though at much higher concentrations and pharmaceutical purity. The mixture is toxic to living tissues. It would kill a person to inject this solution while they were alive, but it's harmless to preserve tissues, and at the concentrations they're using, about 8 molar, meaning 8 moles of cryoprotectant per liter of solution, it will prevent ice formation down to minus 150 degrees Celsius. The cryoprotectant solution looks slightly yellow in the reservoir, the color coming from additives that help with uniform distribution and provide some cytoprotective benefits. As it begins circulating through Robert's body, the team watches for visual signs of distribution. The skin gradually takes on a translucent, slightly waxy appearance, as water in the tissues is replaced by the denser cryoprotectant mixture. This is good. It indicates the chemicals are penetrating effectively, diffusing from blood vessels into surrounding tissues, reaching cells throughout the body. The perfusion continues for hours, a slow, methodical process that can't be rushed without causing damage. Introducing cryoprotectants too quickly causes osmotic stress. Rapid changes in concentration create pressure differences across cell membranes that can rupture cells like tiny water balloons. The perfusionist gradually increases the concentration, ramping from dilute to full strength over 90 minutes, giving tissues time to equilibrate at each step. It's like marinating meat. Sarah thinks you need time for the solution to penetrate completely, to reach every cell and every extracellular space. During the long procedure, the team talks quietly, a mixture of professional discussion and personal conversation. The work is technically demanding but also meditative, requiring attention but not constant crisis management. There are long stretches where the main task is simply monitoring, watching numbers, ensuring everything stays within acceptable ranges. "Do you ever wonder what he's experiencing?" the younger technician asks, nodding toward Robert. "Is there any consciousness left? Any awareness? Like maybe he's aware but can't move or respond?" "No," the physician says firmly, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "Brain activity requires metabolism. Metabolism requires functional circulation, delivering oxygen and glucose, and those stopped when his heart did. We're maintaining artificial circulation now, but it's not delivering oxygen in any useful way. We're just moving fluids to allow perfusion. His neurons have been without oxygen for almost 4 hours. There's no consciousness, no experience, no awareness. The person who was Robert Castellano stopped existing when his brain lost function. But his information is still there," Sarah adds, wanting to clarify the nuance. "The pattern of synaptic connections that encoded his memories and personality, those are structural features of the brain, physical arrangements of molecules. Structure can potentially be preserved even when function stops completely. That's the entire premise of cryonics, preserving information even though we can't maintain the process that information normally supports. It's like a computer hard drive, turn off the power, and it stops functioning, but the data is still encoded in magnetic patterns on the platters. It's strange to think about," the technician says. "He's here but not here, dead by any legal or medical definition, but maybe not permanently. I don't know how to categorize that ontologically. Neither does our legal system," the physician notes. "Death is defined by irreversible cessation of certain functions, heartbeat, breathing, brain activity. By that definition, Robert is absolutely dead." The death certificate was signed, the pronouncement was made. But death historically meant irreversible cessation, and cryonics challenges that assumption. What if it's not irreversible? What if death is just a state of deep damage that sufficiently advanced technology could repair? Then we need new categories, maybe something like reversibly dead, or information theoretically alive, but metabolically inactive. We're betting on a technology that doesn't exist yet, the technician points out. "Humans do that all the time," Sarah says. "We built the Voyager probes before we knew if anyone would ever intercept them. We preserve seeds in Svalbard in case of agricultural collapse. We bury nuclear waste, assuming future generations will know how to handle it better than we do. Cryonics is just more explicit about it. We're preserving people in the hope that future technology can restore them. It's optimistic, maybe unrealistically so. But that's better than the certain alternative." The philosophical discussion continues as the perfusion proceeds. The team members comfortable with these debates after working together for months or years. Behind the glass partition, the daughter watches, occasionally wiping tears but staying present. Sarah wonders what she's thinking, seeing her father on that table, undergoing this strange procedure that's simultaneously a funeral rite and a medical treatment, an ending and a possible beginning. By 3:30 in the afternoon, the perfusionist is satisfied with the distribution. Samples drawn from various parts of Robert's body, taken through small needle punctures in the skin, show uniform cryoprotectant concentration when analyzed with a refractometer. His brain tissue, sampled from a small burr hole drilled through the skull, shows excellent penetration. His internal organs, sampled through careful needle biopsies, all show adequate protection. His extremities, fingers and toes, the areas hardest to perfuse, show slightly lower concentrations but still within acceptable ranges. Concentrations look good across all samples, the perfusionist confirms, reading numbers from the laboratory equipment. We're seeing 8.2 molar average, very uniform distribution across regions. Brain tissue is particularly good, 8.4 molar, which is excellent. I'm confident we've achieved good penetration throughout. He's ready for cooling. The team disconnects the perfusion circuit and begins preparing Robert for the final cooling process. He's wrapped in a specialized cooling vest, a garment with internal channels through which coolant will circulate and placed in an insulated container that looks like a large sleeping bag made of reflective material. Temperature probes are positioned at multiple sites: brain, chest, abdomen, extremities, to monitor cooling uniformity. These probes will stay in place during storage, permanently embedded to allow long-term temperature monitoring. The cooling process is controlled and gradual, designed to prevent thermal stress that could fracture tissues. Rapid temperature changes create differential expansion and contraction, different parts cooling at different rates, which generates internal stresses that can crack brittle tissues like breaking glass. They start by circulating coolant at -20 degrees Celsius through the vest, lowering Robert's temperature slowly. The probes display numbers that drop steadily: 5 degrees, 0, -5, -10. The descent takes hours, a patient progression toward the final storage temperature. During cooling, the team performs extensive documentation, recording every step of the procedure, logging times and temperatures and observations. Sarah fills out forms that will become part of Robert's permanent file, the detailed record of his preservation that will follow him through however many decades or centuries of storage lie ahead. Future revival teams, if they exist, will review these records to understand exactly how Robert was preserved, what condition he was in at death, what concentrations of cryoprotectants were achieved. Every detail matters potentially. At 4:30, the physician invites the daughter into the procedure room. Robert is now visibly transformed. His skin has taken on that translucent, almost alabaster quality that cryoprotectant perfusion creates, and frost is forming on the cooling vest's surface as his temperature drops below freezing. He looks like a sculpture, something rendered in wax or marble rather than flesh. The transformation is profound, the crossing from the world of the living into something else entirely. "This is the final stage," the physician explains gently, his voice soft with practiced compassion. "Over the next several hours, we'll cool him to -196 degrees Celsius, the temperature of liquid nitrogen. At that temperature, all molecular motion essentially stops. He'll be in a state of perfect preservation, unchanged from this moment until revival technologies are developed." "Will you wake him up when the technology exists?" the daughter asks, her voice carrying a mix of hope and uncertainty. "That's not our decision to make," the physician says. "The organization's mandate is preservation and maintenance, keeping patients safe and stable, maintaining the facilities, ensuring continuity. Revival decisions will be made by whoever has those capabilities, presumably medical teams far in the future. But yes, the assumption is that anyone preserved is preserved with the intent of eventual revival, if and when it becomes possible." The daughter nods slowly, absorbing this. He would have liked this. All the precision, the science, the careful attention to detail. He always said death should be treated as a technical problem, something to solve rather than just accept. "He chose well then," Sarah says, "because that's exactly how we treat it, as a problem with a potential solution, a challenge that might be solvable with sufficient technology and time." The daughter says her final goodbye, standing beside her father's cooling form for several minutes in silence, perhaps speaking to him internally, perhaps just being present. Then she leaves, walking out through the patient care bay, past the rows of dewars where her father will soon join the community of waiting patients. Sarah accompanies her to the door, provides contact information, reminds her about the annual maintenance fees and the quarterly updates the organization sends. After the daughter drives away, Sarah returns to the procedure room, where the cooling continues into the evening hours. The controlled cooling continues into the evening, Robert's body temperature descending through ranges that don't exist naturally anywhere on Earth. At -40 degrees Celsius colder than the coldest winter in Antarctica, cellular metabolism, if any residual activity somehow remained, would be completely halted. At -79 degrees, the temperature of dry ice, chemical reactions proceed at infinitesimal rates. At -130 degrees, the transition to vitrification becomes complete. The cryoprotectant-laden tissues transform from viscous fluid to glassy solid, Without crystallization, the molecules arranged in random frozen positions rather than the ordered structures of ice crystals. Sarah monitors the process from the control station, watching temperature graphs descend in smooth curves across the display. The cooling is proceeding perfectly, all probe readings within a few degrees of each other, indicating uniform heat removal throughout Robert's body. No hot spots, no cold spots, just gradual uniform progression towards storage temperature. By 7 in the evening, he's reached -160 degrees Celsius, deep into the realm of successful vitrification, where all the properties of biological tissues have changed fundamentally. Water has been replaced by cryoprotectant. Flesh has become glass-like. Decay has stopped completely. The final transition to liquid nitrogen temperature happens in the dewar itself, where the extreme cold can be absorbed gradually. At 8 o'clock, when Robert's temperature has been stable at -160 degrees for an hour to allow complete thermal equilibration, the team carefully transfers him to a specialized container, a pod made of aluminized fabric that will protect him during the final cooling and serve as his long-term storage. Enclosure. He's lowered into Dewar B4, which currently holds 2 other patients and has room for 2 more, creating a small community in storage. The dewar's interior is filled with liquid nitrogen, vapor at the top, cold but not yet liquid, creating a gradual temperature gradient from -150 degrees near the top to -196 at the bottom, where liquid nitrogen pools. Robert is suspended in this vapor space initially, hanging from cables attached to the dewar's lid, allowing his temperature to equilibrate slowly toward -196 degrees over the next several hours. Rush. This final cooling and thermal stress could cause fracturing the rapid temperature change, creating differential contraction that could crack vitrified tissues. Go slowly, and the transition is smooth, tissues cooling uniformly without stress. Sarah closes the dewar's lid, sealing Robert into his long-term storage environment. The sound of liquid nitrogen boiling increases slightly. The addition of a warmer object to the dewar temporarily increases boil-off as heat is absorbed and nitrogen evaporates. Within a day, the rate will return to normal as Robert reaches equilibrium with his surroundings, becoming just another cold object in the perpetual cold. She updates the database, adding Robert's information to the patient registry. Member 0437, Robert Castellano, preserved January 18, 2025. Whole body patient, Dewar B4, position 3. She attaches scans of his membership contract, medical records, and preservation procedure notes, dozens of pages of documentation. She enters contact information for his daughter, who will now be the responsible party for maintenance fee payments and decision-making. She uploads photographs of his identification tags, unique barcodes that will follow him through storage and allow positive identification if revival occurs. The administrative work complete, Sarah performs evening maintenance tasks. She refills Dewar C7, the one with elevated boil-off that she'd noted this morning. The nitrogen delivery is straightforward, but requires care connecting a hose from the facility's bulk storage tank to the dewar's fill port and opening valves to let liquid flow. The extreme cold means handling connections requires heavily insulated gloves. Touching bare metal at these temperatures would cause instant frostbite, flesh freezing solid in seconds. The bulk storage tank sits outside the building, a large vessel holding several thousand liters of liquid nitrogen that's refilled weekly by a commercial supplier. Liquid nitrogen is relatively inexpensive, a few dollars per liter, making long-term storage economically feasible. The facility uses perhaps 50 liters per day across all dewars, costing maybe $100 in consumables for preserving 200 patients. It's remarkably efficient, this preservation technology. While filling C7, watching the level gauge slowly rise toward full, Sarah notices frost patterns on the dewar's exterior that confirm her earlier suspicion. The vacuum jacket is indeed degrading, allowing more heat leak than it should. She makes a note in the maintenance log. Monitor C7 for continued elevated boil-off. If trend continues, schedule patient transfer to backup dewar and send C7 for vacuum recertification or replacement. The patient's safety requires vigilance, constant attention to details that could, over years or decades, compromise preservation if left unaddressed. By 8:30 in the evening, the facility is quiet. The day staff has departed, leaving Sarah alone for the evening shift until the night technician arrives at 9. Someone is always on site, maintaining the 24/7 watch over the patients. She walks through the patient care bay in the dimming light, listening to the soft hissing of liquid nitrogen, checking each dewar by habit even though the monitoring systems would alert her to any problems. The dewars stand in their neat rows, each one a small community of people waiting together. Some have been here for decades, pioneers who chose cryonics when it was even more experimental, even more speculative than it is now. Dewar A1 holds 4 patients from the 1980s and 90s, preserved with older techniques but still maintained with the same care as recent arrivals. Dewar A7 holds 3 cancer researchers who all knew each other in life, preserved over a span of 15 years, now waiting together. Dewar C3 holds a family, husband, wife, and their adult son, all preserved within 5 years of each other, maintaining togetherness in storage and potentially in revival. They're all equal in their waiting, time having lost meaning in the absolute cold. For the living, time passes inexorably, seconds to minutes to hours to days, the relentless forward march toward aging and eventually death. But for the preserved, time has stopped in any meaningful sense. They're not experiencing duration, not aging, not changing. Whether they wait 10 years or 10,000, the subjective experience will be the same, nothing, and then potentially awakening in whatever future arrives. Sarah pauses at Dewar A3, which holds that mathematician preserved in 1984. She's read his file multiple times, a brilliant researcher in number theory who signed up for cryonics in the 1970s after reading about the theoretical basis for cell preservation at low temperatures. He'd been 57 when he died of a heart attack, relatively young by modern standards, full of unfinished work and unanswered questions. He's been waiting now for 41 years, longer than many people's entire lives. Will he wait 41 more? 100? 1,000? The uncertainty is both troubling and fascinating. Sarah thinks about time's nature, how it flows continuously for the living but stops or at least pauses for the preserved. If Robert is eventually revived, he'll experience time discontinuously, living 78 years in the 20th and 21st centuries, then skipping forward to whenever revival becomes possible. It might be 2050. With him missing only 25 years, he might know some of the people who revive him, might recognize the world with its incremental changes. It might be 2200, with nearly 2 centuries gone, technology and society transformed beyond recognition. It might be 3000, everyone he knew gone for a millennium, human civilization potentially spread across the solar system or beyond. Or it might never happen. The technology might prove impossible, bounded by physical laws that don't allow the degree of molecular manipulation required. The organization might fail financially or legally, forced to shut down with patients warming and decaying. Society might simply forget about these frozen patients, future generations deciding that revival is impractical or unethical, or just not worth the effort. That's the risk everyone accepts when they sign the contracts. Preservation is guaranteed to the extent humanly possible, but revival is only a hope. Sarah returns to the control station and pulls up Robert's file, finding the interview he recorded 5 years ago when he updated his membership paperwork. In the video, a healthier Robert before the cancer, before the weight loss and yellowing skin, talks about why he chose cryonics. He's sitting in what looks like a home office, bookshelves visible behind him filled with chemistry texts and journals. "I'm a scientist," he says on screen, his voice strong and clear. "I understand probability and risk assessment. The probability of cryonics working is unknown, maybe 10%, maybe 90%. We simply don't have enough data to calculate it precisely." But the expected value calculation is straightforward. Even a small probability of revival multiplied by the value of continued life, potentially indefinite life, if aging is solved, gives you a positive expected value compared to certain permanent death through burial or cremation. It's Pascal's wager applied to mortality. The rational choice, from an expected utility standpoint, is to try. But then he adds something more personal, leaning forward toward the camera. Beyond the mathematics, though, I want to see what happens next. I want to know if we solve climate change, if we reach other stars, if we figure out consciousness and build real artificial intelligence. I want to know if string theory is right, if we detect dark matter, if we find life on other worlds. I want to know how the story ends or continues. Death means missing all of that, being absent for humanity's future, and I find that unbearable. So I'm buying a ticket to the future, even if it's a ticket that might never be redeemed. The alternative is accepting certain permanent absence, and I refuse to do that without trying the alternatives. Sarah closes the video, moved as always by these recordings. Every patient has a story, reasons and hopes and dreams that led them to this unusual choice. Some are like Robert, scientifically minded, approaching death as a technical problem with potential solutions. Others are more philosophical, questioning fundamental assumptions about death's permanence and necessity. Some are simply afraid of ending, willing to try anything that offers even a slight chance of continuation. All of them share a refusal to accept death as final, a stubborn insistence that maybe, just maybe, it doesn't have to be forever. She makes her evening rounds one final time, checking each door with the thoroughness that's become second nature. Temperature probes all reading -196 degrees. Nitrogen levels all adequate, ranging from 78 to 94%. No unusual frost patterns except C7's degrading vacuum jacket. Already noted. Pressure relief valves all functioning, venting boil-off nitrogen safely. The monitoring alerts remain silent, everything is stable. Preservation continuing uninterrupted as it has for hours and days and years. In the administrative area, she completes the daily log, documenting the day's activities in the bound notebook that serves as official record. Routine maintenance completed. New patient preserved member 0437, whole body, dewar B4 position 3, all systems nominal. C7 showing elevated boil-off, monitoring continues. The log entries stretch back decades, hundreds of pages of careful documentation, a record of countless hours of vigilant care. At 9 o'clock, the night shift technician arrives for the handoff, a retired engineer who works the overnight shifts, monitoring systems, and handling any emergencies that arise. Sarah briefs him on the day's events. The new patient in B4 who should reach full storage temperature by morning, the elevated boil-off in C7 requiring continued monitoring, the routine maintenance completed. He nods, taking notes in his own log, accepting responsibility for the overnight watch. The facility never sleeps, never stops its vigil. Someone is always here, always watching, always ready to respond if something goes wrong. Sarah steps outside into the Arizona night, the temperature now in the low 50s, pleasant after the controlled 18-degree climate inside. The facility's parking lot is quiet, just a few cars belonging to night staff and security. Above, stars fill the desert sky, brilliant in the darkness away from Phoenix's light pollution. Thousands of stars visible with the naked eye, millions more hidden in the black spaces between. She thinks about those stars, the vast distances between them, measured in light years, the centuries or millennia of travel time that would be required to reach even the nearest ones with current technology. Cryonics is sometimes proposed for interstellar travel, preserve the crew for centuries-long voyages, revive them at destination, avoiding the resource requirements of maintaining living humans for such journeys. It's speculative, far future thinking, but no more speculative than the core premise of preserving people for eventual medical revival. If revival technology is developed, if cryonics proves viable, then suddenly the universe opens up in new ways. Time becomes negotiable, traversable through periods of suspension. The drive home takes her back through the nighttime city, past houses where people sleep unaware of the facility's existence, unaware that 200 people wait in liquid nitrogen just miles away, betting on a future that may or may not arrive. Sarah feels the familiar duality of the work, its profound strangeness alongside its strange normalcy. She spent the day preserving a dead man, in the hope that death might not be permanent. And tomorrow, she'll do routine maintenance on dewars containing people who've been dead for decades. It's bizarre work, existentially heavy, philosophically challenging. And yet it's also just a job, with schedules and procedures and routine tasks, rendered ordinary through daily repetition. At home, she makes dinner leftover pasta reheated in the microwave, simple and quick after a long day. She checks the facility's monitoring app on her phone, a habit she can't break even when off duty. All temperatures nominal, all nitrogen levels adequate, all systems functioning. The soft hissing of liquid nitrogen continues 24 miles away, that constant sound of preservation, of hope maintained through careful engineering and patient vigilance. Before sleep, Sarah thinks about Robert, now at minus 196 degrees Celsius. His biological time stopped, his neurons vitrified in the precise configuration that encoded his memories and personality. Is he still a person? Philosophically, legally, practically, what is he? The questions don't have clean answers, which is perhaps why the work is so compelling. She's caring for people who are simultaneously dead and potentially not permanently dead, present and absent, ended and possibly paused. She sets her alarm for 5:45 tomorrow morning. There will be more maintenance, more monitoring, possibly more emergency calls for new patients. The work continues day after day, year after year, a long-term project measured in decades at minimum, possibly centuries. The technicians who maintain these patients probably won't see the outcome, won't know if cryonics was visionary science or elaborate wishful thinking. That knowledge belongs to the future, to the people who will either develop revival technologies or decide that preservation alone is all that's possible. But tonight, the liquid nitrogen continues boiling at minus 196 degrees. The temperatures remain stable across 200 patients, and the monitoring systems maintain their vigilant watch. Among them, Robert Castellano begins his first night of what might be a very long wait. His daughter will pay the maintenance fees, ensuring his preservation continues through years and decades. The facility's staff will monitor his dewar, refill the nitrogen as it boils away, maintain the cold that's keeping his information intact. And somewhere in the unknowable future, there might be a day when someone opens that dewar and begins the process of revival, waking Robert into a world transformed by however many years or centuries have passed. Or maybe not. Maybe the waiting continues indefinitely, preservation without revival, hope without fulfillment. But as Robert himself said in that video, even uncertain hope has value compared to certain ending. Even a small probability of an enormous benefit continued life. Seeing the future, potentially infinite existence justifies the attempt. The soft hissing continues through the desert night, a sound like distant rain or wind, the constant background of biological time suspended. 200 people waiting for tomorrow, however long tomorrow takes to arrive. And in the morning, when darkness returns and the city begins to wake, the work begins again. The doors will be checked, temperatures verified, nitrogen levels monitored. The patients will continue their wait in perfect preservation, unchanged and unchanging, suspended between death and the possibility of something beyond death. The soft hissing continues. The cold maintains its grip, and hope, careful and patient, waits alongside science in the frozen darkness,